We do have some action items, so can we have attendance, please?
Mr. Perez,
Here.
Dr. Hoyda, Dr. Gase. I will record as absent. Dr. McBride. Here. Mr. Widman.
Here.
First action item is to adopt the agenda. Can I have a motion to do so?
So moved.
A second, please. Not vote, please.
Dr. McBride.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda. Yes. Mr. Widman. Mr. Perez.
Yes. Section 3, the opportunity for the public to address the board. If anybody wants to speak to the board, just step up to the microphone, identify yourself with your address.
Carissa Allen, 135 Clark Avenue. I want to start out by saying that I appreciate all the hard work that has gone into making this school year be in person as long as possible. For my daughters, I can't tell you how much I really appreciate that. But I do have a couple of concerns. Number one, the board meetings that have been taking place in the morning and the lack of posting. I know the one I found in the paper at 7:03, so my fault because that's when I opened the paper. That started at 7. I did see that that one had been posted. I had been told about the next one Thursday night. Went on the website because that's, like I said, where I found the agenda for that first one, and it wasn't even on the website. So that's just kind of concerning to me. I did end up seeing that in the paper then later that morning or whatever, but to have gone on the website the night before, so less than 24 hours, and not to have it on the district's website is concerning to me. The other thing, especially with that one being about how we're going to proceed with remote or hybrid or whatever. I'm just a little, I guess, confused as to why we didn't have those things already in place. What's happening right now with COVID, was predicted clear back in the summer. The surge in numbers shouldn't be a shock to anybody. It's what we've been reading about. So to not have those plans all ready to go, whether we used them or not, we wanted to use them or not, I just don't know why we didn't. It, to me at least, feels like we didn't have those ready to go. And as a parent, that's kind of concerning. So, and then the other thing, just now we're addressing a memorandum of understanding with the TEA about this as well. It just feels like the cart's well in front of the horse, and that's something that should have been done beforehand, before we got to this point. So, like I said, while I truly do appreciate the job and the stress that this has to be, I do still have some concerns as we move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments, or did you want to address any of those, Mr. Grubbs?
No, I will admit that the notice did go out in plenty of time for the board meeting Friday. We will also admit that it was an oversight that it did not get put on our website. So it is not required that we do that, but we generally do that, and we should be doing that. We also started, because of that situation, now we are actually emailing the entire staff from this point on about all board meetings and when it goes out to the public notice that goes out to the papers. And again, we'll try our best to never forget to put it on the website. That was truly an oversight, was not intended at all. And can't agree more that, just now working on this MOU, and I say getting it into this board meeting here today, very, very, I'm glad you noticed that. But I think our TEA reps are here. I think this MOU started back in August. And with, them going to their reps, above them and us going to our attorneys, it's taken us this long, unfortunately, to resolve all the pieces to that. Regarding the hybrid plan, I think, it just depends on who you ask. I would bet you, at this point, every school in the county has also been struggling with this as well, and just getting here, not to make that as an excuse. But bottom line is, we know right now that the most important thing is get kids in the building face-to-face with their teachers. And the best way to do that without impacting a lot of kids is doing a hybrid plan at the high school, middle school level. And so we're thankful that the board did pass that, and that we will be able to look at that model starting next week.
Well, and if I may, I'm the one who actually called those 2 short meetings. One was because of the boiler, and we really wanted to get that out to get proposals on that as soon as we needed to. So we usually meet at 7 when those issues come up. And then the second one was they had developed, I think, the hybrid plan and wanted us to at least consider it before Monday, and wanted to be able to give notice to parents. Had we waited till the evening, then it would have been harder to give parents that advance notice to the weekend if that was something they were going to implement. So we had to balance that. I appreciate working with the TEA on this and all these issues. We have to have them as a partner if we're going to deal with this. And you're right, this was predictable in terms of back in March and February. I remember telling fellow board members that this would be the worst time of this. I'm amazed that we got as far as we did, but I think now that we have science in our pockets here, we understand that there's a value in keeping the younger kids in school and the special ed kids. So the administrators have been doing a fabulous job along with the staff. And then the upper schools, they have different needs. And again, we're just getting through the semester. We got through almost this entire year, which is unbelievable. And we got to take it a semester at a time. We have the academy, which gave us an option. That was an option that other districts don't have, that we do. So we probably should have looked at a hybrid. But you know what, we're doing it now. There's nothing we can do about the past. We've got to move on and deal with this crisis as best we can. And I trust the leadership that we have at this point in dealing with it. Any other comments?
Thank you, by the way.
Okay, so next, we're going to turn to action item 4, is a determination on the OFC Local 571 grievance. So we have to make a determination on it. And so this was the grievance that was presented to us on October 27th, 2020. I would make a motion that we overrule the grievance at this time, or deny it. I can make that motion, right? I'll make it. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? We do have an executive session if you guys want to table and discuss it in executive session. Okay, hearing no, go ahead,
Can we
Mr.
have a
Woodman.
clarification of your motion?
Sure.
We mentioned 2 different things that are conflicting.
Well, overrule and deny is basically, we're not agreeing with the grievance. So if you find that the grievance has merit, then you would sustain it. Would you rather sustain the grievance?
So your motion was to
Deny it.
deny the grievance?
Yes. Correct. You have a second. And again, if anybody wants to table it, we can go into executive session to discuss it further. If there's any more questions. If not, can I have a vote, please?
Bob's looking up
The actual language?
the language from the
Okay.
attorney to share with you so that you're, make sure you're saying it correctly, please.
Thank you. Bob, I don't want to rush you. So keep looking that up. Can we just table that for a few minutes and then go to 4.02, approve the boiler replacement contract? I believe everyone has that one. It's exhibit pages 5 through 7. Can I have a motion to approve that? Second?
Second.
Second, McBride. And Mr. Grubbs, that is the boiler for Noble, correct?
That is correct. The boiler at Noble, total cost projected to be $115,700, or in that approximate range, pending no, further things happening as they put them in. But there was an actual extra $5,000 that was added, $5,000 plus that was added to that contract for what they call it's basically it's a blow down to release the steam off of it. So it's a blow down separator, which is a $5,850 add-on.
And then my understanding is that the school will remain open while it gets installed, correct?
This is correct. We're actually hoping that we can get this in time, that they can do it over winter break, so it has no impact on our students while they're, so if we can get this done over winter break, it'd be great. Part of that is us getting this to them immediately so they can get a boiler ordered. There's at least a 4-week lead time, so it's going to be really close to being able to do this over the break.
Great. Any other questions for Mr. Grubbs?
Just for clarity, the line that this is being funded out of?
It's called the Permanent Improvement Fund, which obviously can only be used for things that have a lifespan of 5 years or more, and so it's not out of our general fund.
Thank you.
And thank you for clarifying that, Dr. McBride. We discussed that in finance, that this actually doesn't affect the forecast in that regard. Okay, can I have a vote, please?
Dr. Hoyda? Yes. Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Mr. Widman?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes. And Mr. Bose, are you ready then? We go back to that item number 4.01.
Yes, Mr. Perez, the term that I believe you're looking for is waived. Waived,
So the motion would be to waive the grievance, correct?
correct.
And that would, in essence, deny it, correct? Okay, I've amended my motion so that it is a motion to waive the grievance as described up there. Do I need a second on the amendment? Any discussion? Vote, please.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Mr. Widman?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda?
That concludes the action item. Oh, no, we have to approve that TEA MOU 4.03. Can I have a motion to approve the MOU as provided and exhibited on pages 8 through 11? And Mr. Grubbs can, when we get to discussion, describe what it actually does.
So moved.
Motion McBride, second. I'll second it.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the TEA and Mr. Bose, who really have worked collaboratively together, as we said, over the last couple of months, making sure that we have this language that is fair and feasible and acceptable to both parties. And again, there's been a lot of work that went into this, and I think it's just something that we need to have in place to make sure that, again, both parties have the ability to do what we need to do to keep school working, especially in those remote conditions. Mr. Bose, would you like to add anything else to that?
I too want to thank the TEA for their collaboration with this, especially Mrs. Chris Joyce. And it really just outlines the expectations and procedures that everybody's on the same page as we move through. We've said it 100 times, this very difficult time within our school building. So thank you to TEA, thank you to Chris Joyce for all the work on this.
Okay, then, I think we already had a motion, right? Any further discussion? Vote, please.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Widman?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda?
4.04, approve the job description as recommended by the interim superintendent, the addendum to it. That's for the IT service technician. Can I have a motion?
Just before you make the motion, I just want to make clarification. The addendum, we put that there because the original agenda that went out, that was not on, but then it was put out again yesterday within the 24-hour time frame to make that adjustment. So we just want to make sure that we showed that up there, so that's why it was listed as an addendum. Okay.
Thank you. With that clarification and motion,
So moved.
a second, please. I'll second it. Any further discussion on that? Vote, please.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Widman?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda?
Now we get to the meat of our work session meeting today, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Grubbs and Ms. Perry.
Well, we wanted to have some discussion tonight regarding the future levy and the operating funds and where we're at. Sharon and I both, Mrs. Perry and I have both had the opportunity now to present to each building and have some really good dialogue and discussion with them regarding our finances and where we were headed. She has updated levy scenarios since those. I think our original anticipation for this year deficit spending was $1.8 million. And in 2024, that $5 million you see there, there were some changes made to this updated deficit spending this year based on some expenditures for TDC. Am I correct, Ms. Perry? And we will have those monies returned to us so that it shows differently for next year. But at the end of the day, we have a huge deficit spending happening in our district. And obviously, if you look in 2024, just 3 short years, it's over $5 million. And we have to address that very quickly as we don't have time really to waste, continuing deficit spending in our district. And we will need a levy, and that levy must, we must find a way to get it passed. What that levy amount ends up being is, to be determined soon, very soon.
Okay.
And I think that's why we're having this discussion tonight. Ms. Perry, I'll turn it over to you. You have the dollar figures and you have them down packed, so.
So you have a couple different sets of documents there. The draft 5-year forecast that needs to be approved by the board in November, so that'll be next week, but I wanted you to see the draft tonight. And then I will have to submit that to ODE by the end of the month. And then you also have some proposed operating levy scenarios assumed for May of 2021. So these scenarios were something that Mr. Grubbs and I were presenting to Finance Committee and to the staff in the buildings. And at that time, it was based on the forecast that was approved in May of 2020. I was starting to work on November, didn't have it finished yet, so we were just basing the scenarios on May of 2020 through 2024. So I've updated those since I have a draft of the forecast done now. So really the most significant thing that has changed, other than adding 2025 to the forecast, and this year, fiscal year 2021 being the first forecasted year, and removing 2017 from the 3-year actual history, is adding $1.2 million in expenditures this year, which was the most significant change to the ending balances, and that is for students that are being served at the Tiffin Developmental Center. Since it's located in our district, we're responsible for it financially until the districts where those students' parents reside can reimburse us. There's a state process for it, so it's going to be delayed 1 year. So we're going to pay $1.2 million this year, but we'll be reimbursed that amount next year. So it affects the bottom line for this year, but then in every future year, you'll see that we're paying for it in the expenditures, but we're getting it back in revenue, so it ends up being a wash in the bottom line for 2022 through 2025, but it does affect this year. Let's see. There were some other things that changed. the expense of the Tornado Academy, $130,000. But that was offset by the fact that we have fewer community school students now. They're staying with us through the Tornado Academy. So our community school expenditures, money that's transferred to the community schools from our state funding, is going to be about $120,000 less. So that's a savings that offsets that. And that's what I found as I was going through the forecast, that a lot of the new expenditures were offset by sources of revenue. So in the end, 2024 came out with about the same amount of deficit spending. And then, of course, it's accelerated in 2025. So it's accelerated because revenue basically is stagnant. If you look at the draft forecast, on line 2.08, the actual years of revenue that's coming in has only changed 0.2% an average over those 3 years. So I basically project that out throughout the forecast. Expenditures on line 5.05 have changed, increased an average of 6%. So I project that out through the forecast with everything that I know today as far as revenue and expenditures goes. Obviously, when expenditures are increasing and revenue is not, because of the nature of revenue for school districts, property taxes stay flat. They are not allowed to grow. The last time that we ran a property tax, a new levy, was back in 2012. So it's always going to collect basically the same amount, because we can't inflate taxes for property owners unless we go back to them and ask for them to vote for that. Expenditures of state funding, years ago, before the actual years in this history, in this forecast, had been increasing, but in 2019, they were frozen. So we started getting the same amount of state funding each year, actually through 2022, with the exception of the state cutting it $500,000 last year due to the pandemic, and then another $500,000 this year. So revenue has been stagnant or even less than years before. Expenditures continue to increase, purchase services increase, salaries and benefits increase. So of course, that's going to cause deficit spending, which is when expenditures start to exceed revenues in any given year. That actually started last year, and it's projected to accelerate throughout the forecast until 2025, and obviously beyond if nothing changes. On line 702 of the forecast, our ending cash balance will start to deplete, and it will become negative in 2025. So we're looking to run a levy next year so that we can correct that, because there's always a delay in the collection of a property tax. If we run a new tax next year, if it's voted in, we won't start collecting it until 2022. Half of our fiscal year, 2022, will be over with, so we will only see half of the benefit in fiscal year 2022. We won't see the full benefit until fiscal year 2023. So I took the forecast that I'm going to ask you to approve next month, and I also have assumptions, just where there's 5 pages of written explanations as to what each line is comprised of. So I took that forecast and I updated these levy scenarios that the Finance Committee has seen and that all of the staff in the buildings has seen. The first one that you'll see is if we run no levy. So column A, line 7, I have zeros there. And that's where I can plug in an estimated millage so that I can see how it affects the whole forecast. The first one, for illustrative purposes, is if we do nothing. You can see that we, on line 23, our ending cash balance is negative in 2024, which is shown on the forecast, and then of course again in 2025. The number of operating days that we like to have reserved, that's cash in the bank, and how many days could we continue to operate on that amount of money. The goal is usually at least 90 days or 3 months. On line 27, you can see that in 2023, we dropped 52 days below that goal. Even though we still have money in the bank, it's not 90 days worth of money. And then, of course, it drops more in 2024 and 2025. If we remove the capital improvements reservation, we're putting away $500,000, or we're forecasting that we're reserving $500,000 per year for capital improvements, things that Jim has mentioned, that facility needs that need to be taken care of. If we remove that from the forecast, we still have a negative cash balance in 2025, and the reserved operating days are still below the 90 in 23, 24, and 25. On line 58, deficit spending shows that we are spending more than we're bringing in each year of the forecast. So then what I did was, the next one, what if we ran 5 mills? What would that fix?
Sharon, can I stop you just for
Yeah.
a second there? Make sure it's clear that capital improvements reservation of those dollars has no impact on deficit spending.
Correct. It's just money that's reserved in the cash balance, but it's not money that is coming in or was spent. Deficit spending is only the amount of money received and the amount of money spent in the same fiscal year. So whether we remove that line or not, deficit spending stays the same. If we would propose and pass a 5 mil levy in 2021, we'll start collecting half of it in 2022, and then the full amount in 2023, which is almost $2 million. That's the line that's in yellow toward the top. Near the bottom, there's another line in yellow. That shows what that levy would cost the owner of a $100,000 home. So they would pay $175 per calendar taxable year. 5 mills, what I did was anything that was in red that 5 mills would fix, then I just turned it to green. So you can see that it fixes our ending cash balance with the capital improvement reservation in 2024, but we still have a negative balance in 2025. The reserved operating days are still below 90 in 23, 24, and 25, but getting closer, but they're still below. The adjusted ending cash balance without the capital improvement money set aside would be positive in 2025. But 24 and 25 would still be below the 90 days that we're shooting for. 23 now has 93 days, so it's pretty much right at where we want to be. Deficit spending is still not corrected. You'll notice that no levy will fix the deficit spending in 2021 because none of the tax revenue will be coming in that year. So that's going to be stuck at 3.2 million projected. Remember that 1.2 million is in there that we're spending at TDC that will get reimbursed the next year. So more accurately, it's a $2 million deficit. And then I show what a 7.25 mil levy will do. That fixes our ending cash balance all the way through 2025, but we're still not at 90 days. We're nearly there in 2023, but we're less than halfway there in 24, and we only have about 20 days of operating cash in 2025. If we take out the capital improvement reserve, obviously the ending balance increases, still fixed. We are nearly at 90 days in 2024, about halfway there in 2025. Deficit spending is still negative through the forecast. And then I show if we run 10 mills. So that fixes our reserved operating days. Let's see, in 2023, With the capital improvement reservation, without it, it fixes it in 2024. Cash balances are in the red, deficit spending, or all cash balances are in the green, are all positive. Deficit spending is still about $2 million in 2025. What does a 12.75 mil levy look like? That fixes everything going out through 2025 except for deficit spending. A 15 mil levy would fix everything. It would cost the owner of a $100,000 home $525. I also, at the bottom of each one of these, showed what kind of income tax would be the equivalent of that millage. So we'll go back to the 5, and that is 3/4%. For a traditional base, it would cost, what we think is the average income earner, $40,000 per year. It would cost $300 per year. The problem with the income tax is that it's much more delayed than a property tax as far as collection goes. If it was passed in 2021, it would take effect on January 1st of the following year, 2022, but because of the collection cycle, we would only get withholding for that first quarter. We wouldn't get anything from annual tax returns. We'd be missing the last 3 quarters of that calendar year. So we would only collect 5.9% of it, so just about $170,000 in 2022. In the end, it would actually end up by 2025 bringing more money in than the 5 mil levy would. But when you're looking at those equivalents, the state will only let you run in 1/4% increments. So I think 0.5% was actually just under what a 5 mil would raise annually, so I bumped it up to 0.75%, and it would catch up by 2025. If we wanted to look at an earned income tax, meaning that only wages would be taxed, not retirement incomes, that would bring in a little bit less, $2.4 million. It would cost an income earner less. I prorated that. That was a little hard to get a lot of information on that, but that tax base would be lower, and it would have the same collection rate. So it would almost bring in the amount that a 5 mil does by 2025. I know that's a lot of information there. Mr. Grubbs, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'd say that, obviously, I think it's important to know that, earned income versus regular income, and for all earners, like retirement, how that impacts people. But I think you pointed out to our staff, as an example, the person paying the income tax may pay $300 annually for that same equivalent $175 would get you for a 5 mil levy. So the income tax creates you paying more money for the majority of the people. Not that one or the other is more favorable. It's just, I just make sure there's some clarification.
And I think the Finance Committee has already reviewed a previous one and now this one today. This has been something we've been looking at for at least over a year now. Originally, we projected a levy in 2023, and then I think with the pandemic, it's accelerated a lot of issues. And so, and we've got the numbers here, so I think what we want the board is, as a collective, one, I think we've decided we are going to levy. Going early, I think in April would be my recommendations. I think that's April, right? We have the dates on there too. But the board digesting this information and coming back with the amounts, I can tell you what the recommendation was from the committee, but I'd like the board to think about it first. There's 0, and I don't believe 0 is an option already. We've said no, that we are going to do something about this. Okay, I will tell you what the committee said. The committee, I think, was leaning towards the 5.0, but all of these, I think, would require cuts as well. But I think having sat through those and having been through levies, I would lean more to the 7.25. And if we're not, because I don't want to put another board in the situation that we're doing this or that we're not really fixing the big issue, which is our deficit spending. It has to be fixed, and we have to have something that's sustainable. None of these include, we've already agreed that we were going to reopen our contract in 2 or 3 years. This doesn't include any of that, so you have to be mindful of that. But this is just operating at this point. And so I have heard some comments from people that wanted us to, why aren't we looking at income tax? And I have to thank Ms. Perry, she did provide those numbers. Those aren't, a lot better in terms of the rates, but then that's what I want to hear from the board too, is that the different tack that we want to take, is pursue an income tax versus the property levy. But we would need to pass the resolution, is it in December? Sharon? Resolution in December?
December 15th would be the resolution to place it on the May 4th ballot.
But we wouldn't need to have the amounts at that point, would we? Or what would we need on that, by that point?
For the resolution of necessity, we basically need to determine how much money we want to raise. And then the county auditor will determine how many mills are needed to raise that amount of money. The tax commissioner will determine what percentage of income tax would be needed. So you should all have a copy of those dates and deadlines. They're not all hard, fast, except for the Board of Elections deadline, February 3rd, for anything for May 4th. That's whether it's an income tax, property tax, which is the operating levy, or a combination of the two. December 15th would just be the normal timeline for the board passing a resolution so that the state tax commissioner can do the certification by January 22nd, or the county auditor can do the calculations so that we can come back and do a resolution to proceed with their calculations on January 26th, and then get it to the Board of Elections by February 3rd. And hopefully the other thing that you all should have is the income tax yield and equivalent millage tables. That's on a white sheet, no color. That's from the Ohio Department of Taxation, and it explains that it rounds to the nearest 0.25%. It's based, the equivalent millage is also on there, and that's based on our latest valuation. But there's a footnote at the bottom of that. The estimated school district income tax yields reflect current projections of economic conditions through tax year 2020 and how those might affect taxable income. There is presently an unusually high degree of uncertainty regarding economic conditions for the remainder of tax year 2020, obviously due to the pandemic. Any variations in conditions could alter later estimates and/or the actual dollar yield from the listed income tax rates. I know that other districts around us that have income taxes, most of the rural districts, they've seen some significant declines in the amount of income tax that they've been collecting this year.
Jim, can I come back to something that you talked about in Finance Committee? Because I think it highlights something that Victor brought up, and that is that we have to do things on multiples of fronts. We have to go forward with a levy, but we also have to adjust our spending. And we want to be mindful of the language around cuts, because we don't want to say what we're doing yet, but it's adjusting spending, right? And so that is nickels and dimes, that's looking at utilities, that's things that you and Scotty have already worked on. Can you elaborate on some of that, how we're kind of doing a multifaceted approach?
Well, I think it is multiple layers. Everything from looking at, as an example that I give earlier, utilities as one example, to actually spending money sometimes to hopefully save money in the future as well. For the example of, and I'll just bounce around on some of the things. So satellite building at the high school. That building costs us $10,000 a year just for electric for that facility. So that $10,000 annually, if those folks were able to be moved back into the high school, could be saved, plus those buildings are in not good shape, and there would be no need to spend money on what essentially is a utility trailer. So that would be savings in the future down the road. That's just an example. We looked at, we're looking at telephone lines as an example. There's several lines have already been cut, but we're looking at cutting more lines that we're paying, say, approximately $70 a month on. When you take a fax line that we're paying $70 a month on, times the number of them we have, and then go to a e-fax where you pay $15 a month for an e-fax that can hold 5 people, using that one e-fax line, that's a huge savings to the district. So Tim's working on those. We're looking at, every utility bill. We talked about earlier just the utilities on this building as an example. The electric on the middle school last year, for the last 12 months, was $103,000 for electric use for this facility, compared to the high school, which was $25,000 for the same period of time. So this building here is 4 times more expensive to operate on electric, and it's just in itself. So we're, what can we do to try to trim that in, say, this building? We have to look at every little piece of the pie to try to determine where those funds can be saved, in my opinion, before you start with the most valuable asset, which is our staff, who do a great job. And so we were not going to stop there. We're looking at transportation as an example, double routing, meaning we will have we'll go out and pick up half the kids, bring them in, and go out and get the other half. So there'd be middle school, high school come in, then we go out and get the elementaries. So it cuts the number of buses down on the road. What does that do for you? Well, in the future, instead of buying 2 buses every year, maybe we buy 2 one year, 1 the next, and 2 the following, because I don't need 24 buses anymore. I only need maybe 15 or 17 buses to do the same job that we were doing. We don't necessarily save on a lot on the hours, because we still have to have hours to go out and get those kids for the bus drivers. But at the end of the day, you're still saving dollars out of your funds. So we have to continue to look at every little piece, and I think we can get there. It's a time thing, and we just need to make sure that we don't want to jump and say we're cutting this before we know that how some of these other smaller things are going to impact the overall budget.
Thank you.
And so from the board, I would also say that the 15 mil levy is a no-go. I don't think the 12.5 is also, so if we want to maintain spending as it is, that's what it would take, 15 mil, and that's not going to happen. This has been happening for a while. I know people have asked questions, first of all, the athletic fees, the book fees. Would those have changed it? Probably not. We're talking millions here. And so we have to remember, too, our funding has been frozen through a formula through the state and their commitment, and that's a whole different other issue. We still have a local responsibility to provide an education, whether or not the state does or doesn't. And so what I need to hear from the board is a collective, is there, 1, a manner of the property tax, and 2, an amount that the board feels comfortable, that can carry us through at least another 5 years. So, any comments? Any questions for our superintendent? I know he's been working hard to look at cost and trying to narrow things down. I know that the public has had several questions. I've gotten some angry calls already. One is concerns that a levy would be used as basically a backdoor to build another school. The school levy failed, and is this just a backdoor attempt to do that? Speaking for myself, no. This is an operating issue. This was kind of out there before. In fact, it was probably a factor that weighed against building the school at that point. And why, in good conscience, I couldn't vote for building any school at that time, because we have this operating issue that needs to be addressed at that point. Second of all, is the other question is, if we sell that property, will that solve our problems? No. We can't get that $1 million back. It would be reserved for general or for capital improvements, so that couldn't be used towards operating. Eventually, that is our plan, to do something with it. Hopefully, it would be developed into some sort of interest or tax revenue for us, but that can't be used to solve this and wouldn't solve our issue here. Any other concerns you've heard, Dr. McBride?
Yeah, so I think that, I think you highlight on a really important part, and Sharon, if I get this number wrong, please correct me, but it was forecasted 3 years ago that we would go into deficit spending? Is that right?
We actually, if I look back all the way to, I think, a forecast from 2013, we were projecting then that deficit spending would begin in 2019. It was fortunately delayed 1 year, 2020, and then is projected to continue. So, we had gone from seeing state increases back in 2014 through 17, and then 18 was flat, and then 19 was frozen. So that changed the picture greatly.
So there's again, kind of like a perfect storm, like we could see it coming, but also it was then exacerbated with 2019 and then with the pandemic as well. So it's moved that timeline up a lot quicker. And so we're at a point now where we have to both go for a levy and make large-scale changes within the district at the same time, right?
Yeah, right. And of course, we didn't see the pandemic cuts coming, the $500,000 last spring and another $500,000 this year. And we don't know how long that will continue.
Right, and I think you've been conservative in that approach because we can't, forecast based on lucky money that we might get or anticipated revenue that doesn't exist. We're stuck with the numbers that show that, we're spending at an increase of 6% a year, and we're at 0.2 revenue increase of revenue and expenditures are 6%. I think most of our middle schoolers could figure that out here. And so, and I guess I would ask the board, I believe all of you agree that zero is not an option.
Absolutely.
That just letting this, do this to our district that's not an option. And we did form a levy committee, and I guess it's just Dr. McBride and myself, and so we need your input too in terms of, what you guys will support as board members as well.
Jeff or Chris, do either of y'all have thoughts on like 5 or 7.25 or income versus property?
I'm in favor of an income tax.
Say again?
I'm in favor of an income tax. The majority of the schools in the county.
And that's why that option is on there as well.
If the county does, or if the people do better, then, we benefit that way, as opposed to just a property tax is flat. And why just, I don't want to say penalize, but why penalize only property owners? Why do property owners have to pay? They're already paying.
And then when Mr. Craycraft was here, he tossed that idea around too, which is why you have the earned income. I guess they were looking at not, trying to create an exception for the people on fixed incomes, retirees, which is, I believe, why the earned income base is on there. Do you have any thoughts on the traditional income tax versus that one?
I like the one that eliminates the people that are on fixed incomes.
And Ms. Perry, that would be the earned income one, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Whitman? You've been down this road before.
What's that?
You've been on a levy before, so.
Right, so it's, certainly we need some additional funds. We'd want to make this permanent levy. So we haven't necessarily discussed that, but I think that must be what the thought process is from what I've garnered so far, so.
I think so, unless we're gambling that the state is going to miraculously in the next 5 years do something that's also permanent. We have to, I think, plan permanently in terms of a permanent levy, because we have to assume that we, A, have to provide these services, and 2, we're going to have to pay for them. So, and we're not going to get any other help.
The timing of such with the pandemic is, maybe we need to take a closer look at that. And, but the numbers are what the numbers are.
do you have a range that you think is more advisable?
No?
So Sharon, can you help me understand better? Because again, I own, this is not my bailiwick. With hearing Dr. Hoyta's insight and thoughts around like if folks do better, we do better, and not penalizing property owners and like that flat income, this piece down here, this like asterisk piece makes me nervous. Can you give insight on like the income tax versus property tax and how that looks or could look or where that could put us in a few years? Is it different? Does it matter?
I don't really have anything to add, Megan, other than, what I've already mentioned. Property taxes, Dr. Hoyta is right, that they generally stay flat. You can gain some property tax from the commercial and industrial area as long as the economy is growing and businesses are growing. Income tax, when the economy is not good, then you can actually take reductions as the area schools have done. I do know that income tax seems to be more popular in rural districts, not city school districts as much. In a city district, oftentimes an income tax is competing with an income tax from the city itself. So we have that to consider.
Thank you.
For the record, Dr. Gage is on.
Do you know for the record when he joined in about? Okay, thank you, sir. Dr. Gase, ask him if he's got any questions or comments.
Dr. Gage, you got any questions or comments?
No, I think, except that, personally. But let's kind of index levy for the property tax. We're constantly doing it. And, frustrated. And I'd rather try to get enough to go 5 years or more before we get deficit spending again than pass one and have to go for another one in 3 years.
And I agree with Dr. Gase. I think that's the cycle. We don't want to be here every 3 to 5 years and doing the same thing. We want something that's more sustainable. Now, understand with income tax, we have a delay getting it. And we do incur the risk that if the economy goes bad, we still have to serve those same number of kids and provide the same number of services. Your income base just shrinks. But he's right, then we don't have to keep coming back. We have that. And then we would still have in our back pocket that we could always go property if we wanted to supplement it in that regard. So the only thing is whether the public would agree to it and feel the same way. I think Tiffin's at .075. Is that what they are for their city tax? Anybody know? So for the municipal tax, it was 1.75, right, I think.
I was going to say 1 1/4 or 1 1/2.
I thought they just went up for the roads. And so the question is, I think I'm getting a consensus from the board on this idea. And I think, Mr. Grubbs, if it's December 15th, is that the resolution date? Is that what you said? That would be a Monday or what day?
That would be our Tuesday board meeting for the month of December.
Oh, that would be, so our
Yeah,
regular meeting?
that falls in line with our board meeting
Okay.
dates. I mean, we could have special meetings.
Well, no, and the reason I had is because last time we considered this, then we had to have the lawyer available to file something that night. And
Right, so if you want to do the resolution of necessity, which is, this is how much money we need, and you want to do the resolution to proceed on the same night, you have to have the county auditor there to certify that amount that you're saying is necessary in order for her to calculate that into something that you can say, yes, we want to proceed with that tax. So we usually don't do that. That's why if we do our regular December meeting, and then she has time to certify it in between, and then we do our regular January meeting, that will meet the February 3rd deadline.
Okay.
But, I mean, we could fluctuate a little bit there.
Go ahead, Dr. McFarland.
After, sitting in finance and looking at the projections and just some of the different pieces and the feedback from the 6 presentations y'all did in the school, 6, I'm definitely leaning more towards the property tax and leaning more towards the 7.25 with some aggressive and multifaceted spending adjustments on the district level.
You sharing City of Tiffin's 2%.
And I guess I just wanted to see some comparables of what other districts have for income taxes, and I think Sharon was looking into that. What I see for I guess we wouldn't address it, I guess we could discuss it as board discussion at our regular meeting next week too. People have other questions, shoot them over to Ms. Perry or Mr. Grubbs, but I know which way I'm leaning, but I don't want to say at this point because I want the board to work this out. And I'll have them prepare, I guess, alternate resolutions. I don't want to make them make too much work with different proposals for the board. Then I hope we can get something that the board can get behind. But I'd like to do it by December so we're ready to go. And go ahead, Ms. Perry.
Well, I just wanted to mention, if I haven't already, that the last time we had a new levy was in 2012. We needed one in 2011. It failed that time, and we passed one in 2012. Before that, the new levy was in 2004. So we went from 2004 to needing one in 2011, passing it in 2012. So, now we're into 2020 fiscal year 2021 already. We do have an emergency levy that's about 5 mils. That was actually the one passed in 2004, and we had to renew it every 5 years. The last time that we renewed it for 2019, we did it for 10 years. So we don't have another levy to renew until 2029. All of our other levies are continuous, so nothing else will come up. We just need to consider a new one at this time.
And then the middle school goes off in a year.
2023 is the last year that it will be collected, and at the same time, the half-mil maintenance levy that goes with that will drop off.
And then in addition to the levy, I think there's the discussion on the way that the previous boards, I would say wisely, were putting aside $500,000 every year, and it wasn't appropriated. It was just, they were kind of keeping it there for future projects. And the question, I think, is that creates some issues with the way we, our forecast looks. And do we want to keep maintaining it? I think there was a concern that, in talking to Mr. Grubbs, that it's kind of nice having there because we do anticipate projects that we're going to need that aren't going to just come out of PI. And so, but we also don't want to appropriate it, because if we were to appropriate it, then we'd be stuck only using them for capital improvements and not being able to apply it towards our operating deficit issues. So it would be my recommendation that at some point, I think it just has to be put into just in the general fund. So we're getting a more accurate picture of what we have, and then rely on the administrators to budget their money. Any comments?
Victor, do you like the income tax? Do you like the 5, the 7.5, 7.25? What's your take on it? You serve on the finance committee, and you've been actively involved with Sharon and
Well,
Jim
with the finance committee, I believe their recommendation was to go with the 5 because I think they thought it had a better chance to pass. I have concerns about that amount being too small and boxing ourselves. We get one shot at it. And I don't think the amount really decides the levy. It's whether it passes or not. The comments that I've heard from the community are that they would back an income tax. Even some of the no votes.
I'm sorry, did you say that they would or would?
They would.
They would.
Even some of the no votes. And the reason being, I think there's this understanding or this idea that the property tax is unfair. And it is in that regard that the state has put so much burden on the local taxpayer. And now it's one of our responsibilities, but I think it's the more popular option. from the conservative side of it, a levy is fixed. It's a lot easier to plan with a fixed amount of money that we know we're going to have it there. The income tax, as Dr. Hoyt has said, could have its upsides, but it could also have its downsides, and we are passing it in the middle of a pandemic where we don't know what that economy is going to look like next year. It also puts us behind about 6 months in collections if we pass it early versus if we pass it late, we could be a whole year behind. And so I kind of would want to hear from the public, but I'd lean towards the income tax at this point, but I don't know because I'd want something comparable to the 7.25, but I don't know what the other districts are charging around here because, our voters will look at that. They'll look at the other districts and go, well, they're paying that. And then we haven't talked to the city, and I kind of think we should probably talk to the city and probably development about how they would, feel about that. If the city is developing as much as I've seen, and it looks like it has been, we just had the, different, factories moving in, hopefully, that would be commercial property tax that we would be losing. They wouldn't pay it, correct? So, that would be a revenue stream. Yeah, what they would do is dilute the property tax for the individual owners, but we wouldn't have that anymore. It would just be the straight income tax that would be relied upon. And I think Mr. Grubb said it, you'll feel it more in your pocket, I think. I think people will see that one more than they do their property taxes. They don't see those in escrow payments. But then I've also heard the concerns that, we have renters who don't pay property tax. They do in the rent, but, I've heard those property owners that say, we'd rather see an income tax. And you guys are more networked in this county than I am, so I want to pass what is ever responsible and has the best chance of passing and sustaining us into the future. So.
If I could add a couple comments, as Sharon and I proposed or, showed these different scenarios to our staff over the last couple of weeks, at the end of every presentation, we ask, we went in reverse order and we asked the entire staff, show of hands, this is an unofficial vote, and but 12.75, we asked, how many people in the room would think that we could pass a 12.75 in Tiffin, Ohio? And Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think one hand was raised in all meetings that we were at, correct? Then we jumped down to 10 and asked how many people in the room think a 10 mil levy would pass. And I can only think of a handful of folks that raised their hand, and it was probably more at our last building than any of the other ones. The first several, we may have had one or two hands go up, but almost none. Then we get to 7.25, and I would say on average about 25% of the people that attended these meetings said that they thought, which is the majority of the staff, by the way, at each building, thought that a 7.25 mil would pass. And a lot of them, there's a few people that raised their hand and then spoke out about that 7.25 and said, if we can do some things to gain the trust of our community back, and if we can show that we're basically supportive and united, that they think that's got a good chance. But then it was really basically 100% of the staff thought that the community would definitely support a 5 mil levy. So that, again, that was an unofficial count, but it's, I think, a pretty good representation because a lot of our staff obviously live in the community and have kids that go to school here.
Jim, did you talk about the income tax too, or just the mills?
So that's a good question, Mr. Whitman. At every single meeting that we were at, they asked about an income tax. And at the time, we did not have the chart that you guys are seeing at the bottom, but we did tell them that income tax would be a topic of discussion for the board to look at because it definitely is an option. We did also share that how it is a popular way of funding schools in definitely rural areas. In cities, not so much, but it doesn't mean that we don't have a chance here in Tiffin.
And Mr. Whitman, I think you're out in the township, correct?
I live in Clinton Township.
Right, so has this ever been broached out in the township in the areas? And I didn't want to leave out the township trustees either when I mentioned the mayor and this issue, so I mean, has that ever been discussed historically in the past? And any vibes for how they would, you know,
Anybody that's talked to me about an income tax for school has been opposed to it.
We also explained to the buildings when the income tax subject came up that the burden on the average taxpayer is a little bit higher. And a lot of times it's because of those 1/4% increments, and you have to round up, and the school would actually end up getting more money. But it would cost the average taxpayer more, typically. And we also talked about the fact that the city has an income tax.
I guess from, as a board, and we're still developing this, I'd like to see some research on what comparable local income taxes are, like maybe Findlay or Fremont have one. I don't know who really has one. And also, I think we were looking at, like, if we can get a number on per 100,000, what other districts pay for their schools. I'd like to see what Perrysburg pays per 100,000, and then versus, you know, like a Buckeye Central or something like that. Because one of the numbers we see is that we're lowest per pupil in the area. I think we're in that bottom 20% per pupil. And you have indicated we haven't gone for levies in really a long time. And, you know, I think we just want to provide the voters, or the taxpayers, and the board the information that we have, you know. Are we where we should be realistically to meet the needs of our children in our community?
Two things, Victor. You can go online, Ohio Department of Taxation. They list all the school districts and the percentages. I think they're listed by county. So you can get all that information. The other thing, and you know, I don't mind if we're compared to Perrysburg and Buckeye Central, but I think for the state has given us a list of 20 equivalents. I think maybe we should consult that. That might be a better picture of what we're doing, what others are doing, and where we stand. That might give us a truer picture of since the state's already given us the 20 equivalents. I think we have that information somewhere, don't we, Sharon? That lists all the expenditures and the average salary and free and reduced, the whole thing. It's very detailed, if I remember correctly, but I think that would be something we should consult and
Yeah.
see where we stand in that.
There's actually a report, it used to be called the CUP report, but it's a district profile report. And it will show, it'll show all the demographics for your district and then for the comparable districts in the state that have similar demographics to you.
And I know you guys have a lot of work to do, but Mr. Grubbs and Ms. Perry, is that something you can provide to the board before our December 8th meeting?
Before the December meeting, correct, but
Yes.
not by next week.
No, we're not. We've got, next week we're just, I think hopefully,
Yeah,
We have regular
sometimes the
meeting.
tax rates are
I can get those.
cumbersome together just because you need to convert, you have to find out what their valuation is so that you can convert their income tax to a property tax or vice versa so that you're
Right, because
comparing.
they have mixed ones
Yeah.
on some of these. And that's, Dr. Hoyt is right, I forgot that is on your income tax forms when you fill out, but it doesn't include if they also pay a property levy too, so. Any other questions for? Any comments from the audience? Questions? Go ahead.
Carissa Allen, 135 Clinton Avenue. I think you're going to probably hear from a lot of people that if you're going and asking for money and then you're putting a bunch of cuts in, they're probably not going to be super happy about that. I understand cuts are probably going to be necessary somehow, but I just think that that's going to be something that's going to that's going to play against the levy is if you're talking like, we're going to ask you for more money and we're still not going to provide as many services. That's just going to be something that you're going to have to fight against.
I think Mr. Grubbs wanted, I don't think we're saying we're going to, at this point, cut services. We have to, first of all, I think, try to look at the way we operate and some of our philosophies and decide first, you know, I think there's cuts that reasonably can be made. Are we going to make $2 million, you know, with our cleaning supplies? No. But every little bit helps. And I think philosophically, I would agree with Mr. Grubbs. Personnel is last, you know, and so I think that's our biggest asset, is what makes our Tiffin City schools great, is our staff, is our teachers, and I think people appreciate that. And so I think we'll protect that, but we need the community to support us as well. In terms of the cuts, I think most of the people I've spoken to said, hey, we have houses, we have businesses. You spend at that amount, that's just not responsible. And I can't, in good hindsight, do the 12 or 15 mil levy and say that's fine. We all have to do that. We all have budgets to manage, and we all have to live within our means. And I think that's what the community says too, is we want something in return. If we're going to pay this, then you have to show that you're accountable and that you're not just wasting money, which we're not, you know, and we have to make that clear to them too. So I think the levy won't succeed without that.
Mr. Perez, also believe that, you know, in the times that we're in right now, everyone has taken a hit, and I think for a district, whether it be Tiffin or any other school district in the state of Ohio, to go to the public and say, hey, we need you to fund all of our expenses over the next 3 to 5 years or permanently without you adjusting and tightening your belt, it would be, that would not be smart of us in any way, shape, or form. I really think that, you know, the community is going to expect us to really look at our finances and say, where can you do some cuts? Where can you trim some of your expenses so that you don't hit us so hard with such a high taxation over, whether it be an income tax or a property tax. No one wants to pay more taxes, and so I think at the end of the day, we have to show that we're being very responsible with those dollars and making sure that we look at every single thing that we have on the table.
Any questions, Dr. McBride? Any from Dr. Hoyda, Mr. Whitman? Dr. Gase, any remarks before we adjourn?
No, thank you.
Thank you, sir, and we'll get you the documents so that you can, if you want me to drop them off, I can.
Just after sitting in finance and then now today, I just want to make sure that I thank Ms. Perry for all of her work and putting multiples of scenarios and all of these things together, but also putting it in language that, at least for me, is very helpful. So thank you very much. I appreciate your intense dedication to this. Thank you.
Hearing no other further questions, then I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. Motion, Mr. Whitman, second.
Second.
Second, Dr. McBride. And our regular meeting is next week, correct? Same 6 o'clock here next Tuesday, correct?
Correct.
All right.
That's correct.
Thank you. See everyone then.
I think she needs a vote.